The fireball erupted across the horizon like a second sun being born from hell itself. Corporal Rebecca Hayes felt the shockwave slam into her chest even from 300 yards upslope. The fuel depot they'd been tasked to secure had become a towering pillar of flame that painted the desert night in shades of crimson and orange. The convoy below was scattered across the sand like broken toys, vehicles burning, men running. The carefully planned advance turned into chaos in the span of 3 seconds. She pressed herself flat against the rocky outcrop, the heat washing over her position in waves. Her spotter, Martinez, should have been beside her. He wasn't. He was down there, somewhere in that burning maze. They all were. Through her scope, Rebecca watched the ambush unfold with the detached clarity of nightmare logic. The enemy had waited until the convoy was fully committed to the narrow approach between 2 storage facilities before detonating the charges. Now, Alpha Squad was caught in a kill box, pinned between walls of flame on 3 sides, taking fire from elevated positions she couldn't even see clearly through the smoke. Her radio crackled, then died. Not interference, actual equipment failure. The blast must have fried the relay station positioned with the convoy's command vehicle, which she could now see was a burning shell on its side. Rebecca's breathing steadied as her training kicked in. She counted 17 visible hostiles, but her gut told her there were more. They were moving with coordinated precision, not random fighters, but trained soldiers executing a rehearsed plan. 2 squads, maybe 3, using the fires to channel Alpha into smaller and smaller pockets of ground. The attack was working. In 12 minutes, maybe 15, Alpha would be completely surrounded. The men down there knew it too. She could see them trying to establish a defensive perimeter, but without communication, without coordination, each fire team was making independent decisions that didn't connect into anything resembling a viable strategy. Sergeant Holloway, recognizable even at this distance by his stocky build, was trying to rally the scattered elements. She watched him gesture toward what looked like the only clear path out, a narrow corridor between 2 smaller fires. Smart. But as Rebecca tracked that path through her scope, her stomach dropped. 3 enemy soldiers were already moving to cut it off. She had maybe 5 minutes before that escape route closed forever. 5 minutes before Alpha Squad went from pinned to dead. Rebecca's hands moved automatically, checking her rifle, counting magazines. 240 rounds, normally enough for an entire operation. Now it felt like nothing. Below, someone was screaming. Not panic, but pain. Through the wavering heat distortion, she could make out a figure dragging another away from a burning Humvee. The wounded man wasn't moving right. Leg injury, maybe spinal. Either way, he couldn't run. "Talk to me, Hayes." She imagined Martinez's voice, the routine they developed over 8 months of operations. But Martinez wasn't here, and the radio was a useless brick of plastic and circuits. She was alone. Completely, utterly alone. And down there, 19 men were about to die. Her orders had been explicit: maintain overwatch position, provide advance warning, do not engage without direct authorization from Holloway. Standard operating procedure for a sniper team. You didn't reveal your position unless absolutely necessary. You were the ace in the hole, the hidden advantage. But hidden advantages meant nothing if everyone you were supposed to protect was dead. Rebecca checked the wind. Minimal, maybe 3 miles per hour from the west. Heat shimmer would be the bigger problem. The fires were creating unpredictable air currents that would play hell with her shots beyond 400 yards. She identified the immediate threats. The 3 soldiers moving to close the escape route were priority 1. After that, she'd need to suppress the team's firing from the eastern ridge. If she could force them to take cover, even for 30 seconds, it might give Alpha the window they needed. It was a terrible plan. It violated every principle of sniper tactics. She'd be firing from a fixed position, exposing her location with every shot, turning herself into a target for anyone with the training to trace muzzle flash. But it was the only plan that didn't end with body bags. Rebecca settled into her shooting position, feeling the familiar points of contact: cheek weld, shoulder pocket, breathing rhythm. She found her first target through the scope. Young guy, maybe 25, moving fast but not cautiously. He thought the battle was won. She'd prove him wrong. Her finger moved to the trigger. 1 breath. 2. The moment hung, suspended, and in that stillness, Rebecca made her choice. Orders didn't matter anymore. Tactics didn't matter. What mattered was the men in the fire below. She broke the silence with a single shot. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. Through the scope, she watched the target drop. Not a kill shot, she'd aimed for the shoulder, the largest margin for error given the heat distortion. But he went down hard, and that was enough. The immediate effect was confusion. The other two soldiers moving toward the escape corridor stopped, uncertain. One dropped prone. The other ducked behind a concrete barrier. Both were looking the wrong direction, scanning the burning buildings instead of the ridgeline. Rebecca didn't give them time to figure it out. She shifted to the second target, the one behind the barrier. Tricky shot. She could see part of his torso, but most of him was covered. She waited, patient, knowing that confusion would overcome training in another few seconds. It did. He leaned out to scan for the shooter. Her second shot caught him in the upper chest. He spun backward and didn't get up. Down in the kill box, Sergeant Holloway was responding even without knowing who was helping. She saw him rally the nearest fire team, directing them toward the gap. They moved in pairs, covering each other, professional even in chaos. That was Alpha Squad. That was why they deserved to live through this. But the enemy was adapting too. On the eastern ridge, someone was shouting orders. She couldn't hear the words, but she saw the result. 3 soldiers turned their weapons upward, scanning the western slopes. One of them had binoculars. Rebecca moved immediately after her third shot, rolling left behind a larger boulder. Rounds cracked past her previous position seconds later. Not random spray, but aimed shots. They'd found her. The tactical situation had shifted. She was no longer a ghost. She was a target. And unlike the men below, she had no one to cover her retreat. No squad to provide suppressing fire. Just her rifle, and a rapidly diminishing ammunition supply. She counted in her head. 16 rounds expended, 224 remaining. The math was brutal. Roughly 35 hostiles, minimum. Even if every shot was perfect, which was impossible, she'd run out before eliminating the threat. This wasn't about winning. It was about buying time. Rebecca found a new firing position, lower and to the left, partially concealed by a fallen rock slab. The angle was worse, but the cover was better. Through her scope, she could see Holloway's element had made it into the corridor. 4 men, moving fast, one supporting the wounded soldier. But the corridor was only 50 yards long. At the far end, she could see more enemy soldiers setting up a hasty blocking position. Holloway was leading his team into a trap. The first round snapped overhead, close enough that Rebecca felt the pressure wave. They'd marked her new position faster than expected. Someone down there knew what they were doing. She took the shot anyway. The soldier at the far end of the corridor dropped, clutching his leg. Not enough to stop him permanently, but enough to disrupt the blocking position. Return. Fire came immediately. Not just from the eastern ridge now, but from multiple angles. They were coordinating, using radio communication she didn't have. One team suppressed while another maneuvered. Textbook squad tactics. The rock slab above her head exploded in a shower of fragments. Rebecca rolled right, feeling stone chips pepper her helmet and shoulders. Her cheek burned where something sharp had grazed it, but her hands remained steady. Smoke from the fires was getting worse. It rolled upslope in thick gray clouds that stung her eyes and turned everything beyond 200 yards into vague shapes and guesses. The thermals were playing hell with her scope's clarity too. She could make out forms, movement, but detail was disappearing. Rebecca shifted to a third position, moving in a low crawl that kept her below the rocks. Her knees screamed in protest. Her elbows were raw. None of it mattered. Through a gap in the smoke, she spotted 2 soldiers trying to flank Holloway's position from the north. They were using the smoke as concealment, smart tactical movement. But smoke worked both ways. She fired twice in quick succession. The first shot missed, throwing up sand 2 feet left of her target. The second connected, 1 hostile down. But the magazine was empty. Rebecca dropped behind cover, ejecting the spent mag and slamming a fresh one home. 30 rounds gone, 210 remaining. The math wasn't improving. Below, she could hear engines. Not friendly engines. Enemy reinforcements, arriving from some staging area she hadn't known existed. The intelligence briefing had said light opposition, minimal organized resistance. The intelligence briefing had been catastrophically wrong. A machine gun opened up from somewhere to her right. The heavy rounds chewed through rock like paper, forcing Rebecca to abandon her position entirely. She scrambled down slope, sliding and rolling, until she found a depression that offered protection from that angle. Her heart was hammering now. Not panic, but the physiological response to being hunted. Every instinct screamed at her to retreat, to fade back into the desert darkness where she'd be safe. But Holloway's team was still in the corridor, still trapped, still dying. Rebecca checked her rifle, scope still aligned, barrel warm but not critical. She had maybe 40% of her ammunition left. It would have to be enough. The machine gun was the priority now. As long as it commanded the high ground, Alpha couldn't move. Rebecca traced the fire back to its source. A technical truck, modified with a heavy weapon mount, positioned on a rise 300 yards northeast. 300 yards through heat shimmer and smoke. The longest shot she'd attempted today. She settled into position, compensating for wind, distance, and the fact that her target was behind armor plating. She didn't aim for the gunner. She aimed for the ammunition feed. The shot took 3 seconds to reach its target. In that time, Rebecca was already moving, knowing the muzzle flash would draw immediate response. She didn't see the impact, but she heard it. The ammunition cooking off sounded like firecrackers, a chain reaction that silenced the machine gun and sent the crew scrambling for cover. The tactical situation shifted again. Holloway's team broke from the corridor, moving fast toward the next cover position. 6 men now, she counted. They'd picked up strays from other fire teams, but they were still boxed in. The enemy had pulled back from the immediate kill zone but maintained their encirclement. They weren't trying to finish Alpha anymore. They were waiting for reinforcements to make the job easier. Rebecca needed to change that calculation. She targeted the enemy squad leader, recognizable by how the others oriented on him. Center mass shot, 200 yards, minimal heat distortion at this angle. He went down, and the squad's cohesion immediately degraded. Then she targeted the next soldier who tried to take command, then the next. It was brutal, systematic, and exactly what the situation demanded. She was forcing them to choose between command structure and survival. Every time someone tried to organize the squad, she made them regret it. But it was burning through ammunition at an unsustainable rate. 70 rounds gone, 170 remaining. Below, Holloway had found a defensive position in a crater created by the initial explosions. It offered cover and fields of fire, but it was still surrounded. They could hold there for maybe 10 minutes before enemy reinforcements arrived in force. Rebecca needed to create an exit. Not just suppress the enemy, but actually open a route. She studied the terrain through her scope, looking for the weak point in the encirclement. There, a gap between 2 enemy positions, maybe 60 yards wide. If Holloway's team could reach it before the enemy closed it, they had a chance, but 2 soldiers were already moving to plug that gap. Rebecca fired, dropped one, fired again. The second went to ground but didn't fall. She could see him pulling himself toward cover, wounded but combat effective. Then someone screamed behind her. Not close, maybe 100 yards back, but behind her. The enemy had sent a team to flank her position. The hunters had become the hunted. The grenade landed 15 feet from Rebecca's position. She saw it tumbling through the air, a dark shape against darker smoke, and threw herself sideways. The blast was enormous. It felt like a giant fist punching her entire body at once. Her helmet absorbed most of the shrapnel, but the pressure wave left her ears ringing, a high-pitched whine that drowned out everything else. Rebecca rolled to her knees, disoriented. Her rifle was on the ground 3 feet away. She grabbed for it with hands that felt numb and distant. More shapes moving through the smoke behind her. At least 3, maybe more. They'd committed a full team to eliminate her. She couldn't fight them at close range. Not alone, not without her spotter, not while also trying to provide overwatch for Holloway's squad. So she ran. Rebecca scrambled downslope, half running and half falling, using the smoke and terrain as concealment. Rounds cracked past her. Someone was shouting in a language she didn't recognize. They were close, too close. She slid into a ravine and pressed herself against the rock wall, gasping for breath. Her hands were shaking now. Not fear, not exactly, but the physical aftermath of the blast. Her fingers felt thick and clumsy as she checked the rifle's scope, misaligned. The fall had knocked it slightly off true. Rebecca wanted to scream. Instead, she forced herself to breathe, to think. The scope was still usable, just not for precision shots beyond 200 yards. She could work with that. She had to work with that. Below, the tactical situation had deteriorated. Enemy reinforcements had arrived, 3 more vehicles that she could see. Holloway's team was pinned in the crater, surrounded on all sides now. They had maybe 5 minutes before it became a massacre. Rebecca checked her ammunition, 140 rounds remaining. The magazine in her rifle was half empty, and her hands were still shaking too badly for reliable long-range shooting. This was the moment. The point where training met reality, and you discovered what you were actually made of. Every instructor had warned about this. The moment when the mission was impossible, when the odds were overwhelming, when the smart move was to fade back and survive to fight another day. But those men in the crater were her responsibility. Martinez had been her partner. Holloway had trusted her to provide overwatch. Rebecca forced her breathing to slow, forced her hands to steady. The shaking gradually subsided as her body compensated for the blast trauma. She had a rifle. She had ammunition. She had a position that, while compromised, still offered angles on the enemy. That would have to be enough. The smoke had become so thick that Rebecca was navigating more by memory than vision. The fires were creating their own weather system now, columns of superheated air that twisted and turned unpredictably. But the enemy was dealing with the same conditions. And Rebecca had one advantage they didn't. She'd spent the last 30 minutes studying this terrain, learning every rock and depression. She moved by feel, keeping low, using the smoke as concealment. The flanking team that had thrown the grenade was still searching for her, but they were searching in the wrong place. Rebecca circled behind them. Through gaps in the smoke, she caught movement. A soldier, silhouetted against one of the fires, checking his weapon. Range, 80 yards. The scope was off, but at this distance, she could compensate. The shot dropped him. His partner turned, scanning for the threat, weapon raised. Rebecca was already moving. She fired from the new position, saw him fall, kept moving. It was guerrilla tactics now. No fixed positions, no careful aim points, just movement, opportunity, and the brutal math of eliminating threats one at a time. But every shot revealed her position. Every muzzle flash was a beacon in the smoke-dark night. And the enemy was learning, adapting, coordinating their response. She heard engines revving. The technical trucks were repositioning, trying to cut off potential escape routes. They knew Holloway's team would have to move soon or die in place. Rebecca found a new vantage point on a small rise. From here, she could see the gap she'd identified earlier. It was still open, but barely. 2 enemy soldiers held the near side, and more were moving to reinforce. Holloway's team would have to go through them, and they'd need covering fire to do it. Rebecca settled into position. Her magazine had 12 rounds left. She reloaded, chambering a fresh round, then took careful aim at the first soldier guarding the gap. The heat shimmer made him waver in her scope like a mirage. The smoke obscured everything beyond 200 yards. The misaligned scope meant she had to aim slightly right of where instinct told her. She exhaled slowly, finding that perfect moment between heartbeats, and squeezed the trigger. The soldier went down. His partner reacted instantly, diving for cover and returning fire in Rebecca's general direction. But general direction wasn't good enough. The rounds went wide. Rebecca adjusted, led the target slightly, and fired again. The soldier stopped moving. The gap was open. For now, she shifted her aim to the reinforcements, fired 3 quick shots that forced them to ground. They weren't accurate shots, couldn't be in these conditions, but they didn't need to be. They just needed to buy time. Through the smoke, she saw movement in the crater. Holloway's team was making their move. They came out of the crater in 2 groups, moving fast and low. Holloway led the first element, 3 men in tight formation. The second element, led by someone Rebecca didn't recognize, followed 10 seconds behind with the wounded. The gap was 120 yards from the crater. In open ground, a trained soldier could cover that in under 20 seconds. But this wasn't open ground. This was a maze of debris, fire, and active combat. They made it 30 yards before the enemy responded. A technical truck roared around the burning fuel depot, positioning itself to block the gap. The heavy weapon mounted on its bed swiveled toward Holloway's team. Rebecca saw it happening in slow motion. The gunner was fast, professional, already acquiring his target. Holloway's team was exposed, no cover between their position and the truck. In 3 seconds, maybe 5, the machine gun would open up. The range was 350 yards. Through heat shimmer, smoke, and a misaligned scope, the target was a moving vehicle on rough terrain, and she had one chance, because after this shot, every enemy soldier would know exactly where she was. Rebecca didn't think. Thinking would have told her the shot was impossible. Instead, she let training take over, muscle memory built from thousands of hours on the range. She aimed not at the gunner, but at the truck's front right tire. If she could disable the vehicle's mobility, it would disrupt their firing platform, maybe by precious seconds. But as her finger touched the trigger, her tactical brain offered a better option: the truck's fuel tank, visible beneath the chassis, a rectangular shadow against the firelit ground. One shot, high-risk target. But if it worked, Rebecca adjusted her aim point, compensating for wind, distance, and the scope's offset. She found that perfect stillness inside the chaos, the quiet center that every sniper learned to access. The rifle roared. The round crossed 350 yards of smoke and heat in less than a second. Rebecca saw the impact, saw the fuel tank rupture, saw the truck swerve violently as the driver lost control. It didn't explode. Movies lied about that. But fuel sprayed across the ground, and when it hit the burning debris nearby, it ignited in a low, spreading fire that forced the entire crew to abandon the vehicle. The gap was clear again. Holloway's team ran. They moved with the desperate speed of men who knew this was their only chance. Rebecca provided cover, firing at anything that moved near their route, forcing enemy soldiers to choose between shooting and surviving. 90 rounds left, 80, 70. The wounded soldier was falling behind. One of Holloway's men grabbed him, practically carrying him. They stumbled, fell, got up again. Rebecca dropped 2 more hostiles who tried to cut them off. 60 rounds, 50. The second element was through the gap. The first element was almost to safety beyond the immediate kill zone. They were going to make it. Then Rebecca's rifle clicked empty. She dropped the spent magazine, reached for a fresh one. Her fingers found nothing. She'd burned through her entire combat load. Out of ammunition. Out of options. And the enemy was closing in on her position from 3 sides. Rebecca abandoned the rifle. It was dead weight now, useless without ammunition. She kept her sidearm, a pistol that held 15 rounds and was effective to maybe 50 yards. Against squad-level forces with automatic weapons, it might as well have been a sharp stick. She ran downslope, using terrain and smoke as cover. Bullets chased her, cracking past close enough to feel the displacement. She didn't look back. Looking back would slow her down, and speed was the only advantage she had left. The ravine she'd used earlier appeared through the smoke. Rebecca didn't slow down, just launched herself over the edge and tumbled down the slope in a controlled fall that ended with her slamming into the rocky bottom hard enough to see stars. She forced herself up. Her ribs screamed protest. Probably cracked, possibly broken. Didn't matter. Footsteps above, voices shouting. They were following, and they were close. Rebecca moved through the ravine at a limping run. It wound roughly northeast, away from the battle, deeper into the desert darkness. Every step was agony, but stopping meant dying. Then she heard something that made her freeze. American voices. Ahead, not behind. She rounded a bend in the ravine and nearly ran straight into Corporal Jennings, one of Holloway's team. He had his weapon raised, but lowered it when he recognized her. "Hayes! Christ, we thought you were dead." "Not yet." Her voice came out as a rasp. "The others?" "This way." He led her 20 yards to where the rest of the squad had taken cover in a wider section of the ravine. 9 men total. Not the full squad, but 9 more than she dared hope. Holloway was there, bleeding from a cut across his forehead but upright. When he saw Rebecca, something like relief crossed his face. "That was you up there. The Overwatch." "Yes, Sergeant. You disobeyed orders. Engaged without authorization. Compromised your position. Rebecca waited for the hammer to fall. Court-martial, disciplinary action. Everything her career could have been, gone. Holloway extended his hand. You saved our asses. Thank you. She shook it, too exhausted for words. Enemies pulling back, Jennings reported. Think they lost their appetite for the fight, or they're regrouping, Holloway countered. Either way, we move now while we have the chance. Hayes, can you travel? Rebecca nodded, even though her ribs were screaming and her legs felt like rubber. Then, let's go home. They moved out in tactical column, wounded in the middle, security front and rear. The fires behind them painted the desert in shades of amber and crimson. But ahead, past the burning wreckage, Rebecca could see the faint glow of dawn. The sun rose over the desert like a promise being kept. The fires still burned behind them, but their fury had diminished, reduced from raging inferno to smoldering aftermath. Smoke columns rose straight into the still morning air, black pillars marking where the ambush had occurred. Alpha Squad had linked up with friendly forces 3 miles from the kill zone. The relief column had arrived 2 hours too late to help, but just in time to provide medical evacuation and secure transport. Rebecca sat on the tailgate of a transport truck, letting a medic tape her ribs and clean the cuts on her face. The pain was distant now, buried under layers of exhaustion and shock. Her rifle lay beside her, scorched and battered. The scope was definitely ruined, the stock was cracked, and sand had infiltrated every mechanism. It would probably never fire straight again, but it had fired straight when it mattered. Sergeant Holloway approached, freshly bandaged. Final count. 14 men recovered alive, 4 critical but stable. Martinez didn't make it, neither did Reynolds or Cooper. Rebecca closed her eyes. Martinez had been joking about his girlfriend's terrible cooking just 6 hours ago. Now he was a name on a casualty list. The brass will want a full debrief, Holloway continued. About what happened up there, about your actions. Will they court-martial me? Holloway was quiet for a moment. Hayes, you fired 243 rounds from an overwatch position against an enemy force that outnumbered you 30-1. You engaged without authorization, violated tactical doctrine, and turned yourself into a target to protect men who weren't even in your direct chain of command. She waited. By every regulation in the book, you should face disciplinary action. He paused. But 14 men are alive, because you made the decision you made. I'll be recommending you for the Silver Star. Rebecca looked up sharply. Sergeant, I was just doing your job? No. Your job was to observe and report. You chose to do more than that. You chose to put everything on the line when no one would have blamed you for pulling back. He placed something on the tailgate beside her. Her scope, recovered from the battlefield. Get some rest, Corporal. That's an order. As Holloway walked away, Rebecca picked up the ruined scope. Through the cracked lens, the world was fragmented, distorted, almost unrecognizable. But she'd made it work anyway. When precision became impossible, she'd adapted. When the rules didn't fit the situation, she'd broken them. The other survivors were gathering near the transport vehicles, preparing to move out. They glanced at her occasionally. These men she'd saved, but no one approached. What do you say to someone who held death at bay with a rifle and sheer determination? Maybe there weren't words for it. Rebecca set the scope aside and stood up, wincing as her ribs protested. The medic tried to make her sit back down, but she waved him off. She walked to where her squad was gathering, each step an effort, and took her place in the formation. Jennings nodded to her. Hell of a night, Hayes. Yeah. They loaded into the transports. The convoy rolled out as the sun climbed higher, leaving the burning depot behind. In a few hours, they'd be back at base. There would be debriefings, reports, investigations. The machinery of military bureaucracy would grind forward, trying to make sense of what had happened in the chaos and smoke. But for now, Rebecca just watched the desert scroll past. She thought about the 243 rounds she'd fired, about the decisions made in fractions of seconds, about the thin line between following orders and doing what was necessary. The weapon hadn't saved them. The tactics hadn't saved them. What had saved them was the decision to act when inaction would have been safer, easier, more acceptable. Sometimes survival came down to one person making the hard choice. One rifle, one chance, and taking it, no matter what the cost. Rebecca leaned against the cold metal frame, feeling the engine's vibration. Her hands, steady on the trigger for hours, now trembled slightly. She thought about the first shot, the critical moment she'd broken protocol. That decision had set everything in motion, ending with 14 men breathing and 3 buried in sand. Across from her, one of the wounded soldiers slept peacefully. He'd been the one they'd almost left behind. Rebecca had burned 6 rounds, creating cover